All right. Well, I think we got a pretty good crowd, so we will go ahead and get started on this. So everybody, this is Joe Curtis. He is the Virginia City historian. His family also used to own the Mark Twain bookstore, which is actually right behind his right shoulder right there. You can see it, which many of us went to and supported and enjoyed back in '99 for the convention. We did have David Dortor in a video earlier talking about the bucket of blood and how he had a plaque from who was the guy that used to own that?
Don McBride.
Yes, talking about Don McBride. So he's got a wonderful presentation for you to talk about how Bonanza had revived Virginia City. He's been there a long, long time, but I will let him take it from here. And if you have questions for him, please type them in the Q&A and not the chat. And I'm going to pop back on at the end, and then I'll ask your questions to him. So take it away, Joe.
Thank you all for allowing me to come and meet up with you all. This is history of Virginia City is a passion of mine. And I've been around for quite some time, which I'm sure you can tell by the picture on the screen. And so I thought they asked me if I could give you an overview of how Bonanza changed Virginia City. And some things that kind of initially came to my mind, and I think you're seeing one of the things that always fascinated me about this map is that if you look at the map, Carson City is obviously much closer to the ranch house, the theoretical ranch house, than is Virginia City. Carson City wasn't at that theoretical point in time, would not have been as large of a community or as wild or as many things going on. So I guess that's why they went to Virginia City. And to this day, we're very happy that they went to Virginia City. So the title of this basically is Bonanza in Virginia City. So in 1875, you have to realize that the population of Virginia City was about 20,000 people. And this is a view shown in about 1881, 83, along in there, from I have a huge collection of original photographs of Virginia City dating back to the 1860s. And from that period of time, the 1860s and 90s, Bonanza went from Bonanza to Baraska over and over. And so it's interesting that the TV show used the term Bonanza. And Bonanza is a common word meaning, a big find or something, primarily in mining terminology, a find of large body of ore that's very rich. Borrasca is a Spanish word meaning a downturn or a depression or a time of not much happening. And so it would go back and forth from Bonanza to Borrasca. After 1875, there was somewhat of a gradual downhill run in terms of mining on the Comstock. And the Comstock, it's called the Comstock because of a man's name that was part of the original founders, Henry Tompkins Page Comstock. So the minimal mining activity was into the 1940s, down to about 300 population by the mid 40s. And some tourism was coming to Northern Nevada to some degree. In the 1940s, the community activity began to grow a little bit. Community was relatively dormant and dying to a great degree, but it was beginning to attract artists and other interested people in the Old West. The McBrides, Virgil and Don, were the owners and founders of the Bucket of Blood in 1931, and they were big pushers early on of tourism. In 1940s, Warner Brothers released the movie Virginia City with Errol Flynn, Randolph Scott, and Humphrey Bogart. And in the 1950s, a pair came to town, Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg, arrived on the Comstock. Beebe and Clegg were Eastern bon vivants, if you will, and they were a wild sort of personae. They liked the West. They kind of viewed themselves as people who they would like to have been here in the thriving time of the Comstock. And the Comstock at that time was full of many different spirits, kindred spirits of many kinds. There were remittance kids or people who were paid to stay away from home. There's still a couple of those around. I'm not one of them because I'm still here, obviously, but they were Easterners for the most part. They were looking for excitement. They were waiting out their divorces to some degree. In 52, they reinvented the territorial enterprise. So things started moving forward to some degree. Who was it that looked ahead and could see the future? Well, it was the McBrides, the Marxes, Bill and Margaret Marx, my folks, the Hardys, and other locals that could see to enter the future. The territorial enterprise was used to a great degree by Beebe and Clegg to develop the tourism of the community. Here you see a picture of McBride, Versal McBride, in front of the Bucket of Blood in about 1931 when they opened it. And here's what it looks like today. Here's the Delta Saloon and Restaurant area. What it was called at that time, it was the Delta. This is probably from the 20s in the Mocha restaurant. And here it is in the 50s, but it's different today, of course, but that's in the 1950s. The territory, that slides out of place, obviously. This building is interesting because it's called the Virginia Garage. It was a Chevron gas station. And this is what it looked like in the 1940s and 50s. And here's what it is today, the Bonanza Saloon Casino. And if you see this upper portion here of the building, right up above the A and the N, and the A and the N on Bonanza, that portion of that building right there is this upper portion right up here of this building. So it was after the Bonanza came on, it reinvented it. We call it Bonanza Revival Architecture. Kind of become somewhat of a official title of architecture, I guess. But who knew the Bonanza as a TV program was coming to town for sure? Well, oddly enough, my parents were one of the ones that were very aware of it because they dealt in antiques and museum type artifacts and historical documents and so forth. And they had some business dealings with Mr. Dortort, as well as Mr. McBride had, and the Marxists. So these three families kind of knew what was coming to town. My parents bought other properties and so forth, as did Don McBride, picked up some businesses and properties, and saw that this television program was going to advertise to the world about Virginia City, and the opportunities were here now in the 1958 era to build up something that was going to be worthwhile and that would be sustaining a number of tourism-oriented businesses for a long time. How did they know? As I say, they did because they knew Mr. Dortort. My folks knew him because he requested historical documents and things from them that they had to help him develop that whole program. I would presume. I don't really know how those guys work that stuff, but and how they prepared was they began establishing and buying up businesses, buying up buildings, putting in businesses and other ones. And so how did the TV show, when it comes on, it was really advertised heavily, and it began to change the image of the community. Remember, Virginia City is a mining town. It's a mining community. It always has been a mining community. It has never been what we think of as a cowboy town. The awareness to the world, though, was marketed as it being a cowboy Western community. And as a result of that, it has created an imaginary town or an imaginary persona, and that has been in competition with what the real place was. So it's since 1959 to today that myths versus reality still exists, but the purpose of it is in what we think of as locals. We go, well, yeah, it changed the image from a mining town to a Western community, but at the same time, it brought tourism to the community in a large way. So you had to kind of change your ideas and thoughts about the purity of the history and think about it in terms of how you can come to grips with the imaginary town that Bonanza created for the community and brought forth massive tourism in reviving the community. In the pictures earlier that you saw, those are pictures that were in the 20s and 30s, and the community was dying. The buildings were falling down. Many buildings fell down in that period from wind, from snow load, and so it brought a feeling of let's make the community look better. Let's restore some buildings. Let's put things in that kind of participate with that, whether it be the myth, and try to bring the myth and the reality together. So as a part of that, what happens is we have this myth, if you will, that says that here's all the cowboys and the Western guys, but they were never here. The cowboys were in the Washoe Valley area, the Dayton area, the Eagle Valley, the Carson Valley areas. They were the ranchers, the cattle people that brought food and produce and what have you to the Comstock to make the miners have food and ability to function. There was a 601 Vigilance Committee that was here actually at one time. So now we have this plethora of Old West persona portrayal individuals and so forth. So and there's a number of groups. There's the 601, there's the Silent Riders, there's Ladies 109s, there's the BC Gunfighters. In 1990, I spent 6 months back in Virginia and around Gettysburg and around Fredericksburg, Virginia, and saw where they used docents to develop history in the community. So the Bonanza thing got us to thinking, we need to make it look like it's Bonanza or some some appearance in that nature, and it will help develop our tourism base. And it did, absolutely, no question about it whatsoever. It just kind of developed it in the wrong, what I think of as a purist, I think this is the wrong direction. But then to be on the honest side, I think that if we'd have developed it totally with the mining interest type thing, it wouldn't have brought people to town. It did not have a miners is not a big deal, but cowboys is a big deal. The Asian population are fanatical about the Western cowboys. We have Asian mining or bus tours that come in here all the time, weekly, and they bring bus tours in and so forth. So what the locals did to generate tourism after the Bonanza TV came on is, one, they embraced that Bonanza persona, if you will, and they began developing and spreading myths about the cowboy activity, if you will. The reality is that when the cowboys came to town, they usually got their butts beat by the miners and sent packing back down the hill, if you will. Because remember, Virginia City is at 6,000 feet, and all the cowboys worked at 4,000 feet. So they didn't have a whole lot of stamina to keep up the fight. It increased, they increased the businesses. They opened new businesses, and they did it in a vision of that Bonanza vision of the Old West communities. They made up ghost stories, which I hear today. My mother was one of the big maker-uppers of ghost stories. And now that Virginia City is called the most haunted town in the nation. There's some various directions like that. So the stories, the ghost stories that I know that my mother and another lady or two other ladies would make up to generate tourism business, I still get them come back to me, and once in a while I'll decide, oh, I just got to break this guy's bubble and tell him that, yeah, I remember when my mom made that one up. So unfortunately, that's part of what the whole persona has come from or come to today over what reality was. Now we have the Comstock Historic District, which is a federal district designation, which actually is designed to preserve the history of the community, the appearance and the architecture and that sort of thing. I actually am the chair of that commission. It's a governor's appointed commission, and I'm the chair of that Comstock Historic District. So being a purist, of course, I'm always really pushing for making sure that if you build a new house or you remodel an old house, it needs to be done in a fashion that looks appropriate to that era, to that 1860s, 70s era of whatever they're, within that period of time. It's a National Historic District, and it preserves the Western history. Virginia City Historical Society is another one. There's a number of museums, Fourth Ward School, Mark Twain Museum of Memories, which we now have decommissioned because that was my parents'. There's the Way It Was, and there's the Firemen's Museums. So, what would Virginia City look like today if Bonanza had not aired on TV? Probably something like this, like it actually looked in the 1950s. It probably would not have progressed much. It might have died more, if you will. If you go back up to some of these other areas of what occurred in some of these areas, that after Bonanza, there was a number of businesses that were opened that took on names that related to the Bonanza thing. For example, in the area behind me here, you can see on my left shoulder, you really can't read it too well, but there's the Bonanza Saloon and Casino, and I showed you the difference between the Bonanza now and the Bonanza previously as a garage. And so now you've got the Ponderosa Saloon, and it's been around since the 70s, probably 60s or 70s. You have the Bandito, the Red Dog, the Red Garter, the Mark Twain, and all of these names that are of that era. And the thing that's interesting is that all of these titles or names of businesses, if you watch enough of the episodes from Bonanza, you'll see, of course, references to many of these. There's an episode I know that relates to Mark Twain, at least one anyway. I know there's Mexican bandits that appear. There's various saloons and so forth that are famous for that era. The thing, though, it's interesting in terms of the myth versus reality. A lot of the saloons' original names were actually names that came out of the East Coast, high quality saloons that, as people migrated out here in the 1860s and 70s, they would name businesses and so forth after familiar areas that they were aware of back in the East Coast when they immigrated or migrated from. But there is no question that Bonanza had a major effect. I don't think that we would have the tourism at all that we have today of 1.5 million visitors that we have today, that we wouldn't have if we had not had the Bonanza situation. The thing that always impressed me, or I guess you could say annoys me, is the fact that cowboy persona has pretty much taken over the community. So I push that really mining is what it was all about. But in today's environment, because Bonanza revived this community, gave it the CPR, if you will, that it needed to bring back business into the community. We have about 200 beds in bed and breakfast, hotels, motels, and that sort of thing. Numbers of restaurants with varying degrees of quality service and product. We have gift shops with that persona of the Old West, and the typical tourism types of things. But even during this period of the coronavirus and the stay home thing, every day there are tourists in Virginia City. Bus tours in the summertime. We have buses that come in 2 or 3 times a week with tours that come from all over California. When I was a kid, we used to have competitions to see who could find a vehicle in town with the farthest away license plate. We also used to be, as kids, do really, really weird things. So people would say, "Hey, how do you get to the Ponderosa Ranch?" And my mother worked in the recorder's office, county recorder's office. So after school, I'd be waiting for her sitting on the steps of the courthouse, and they'd ask that question, and we'd say, "Okay, well, you go down a particular road, which would be 6 Mile Canyon, if you're familiar with that. And you go down there and you take a left turn on Highway 50 and you go out to Silver Springs, and then you take a left and you go over to Interstate 80, and then take another left and go into Reno, and then take another left and come down Highway 395 or 580 as it's called today. And then you'll see the sign coming to Virginia City. And they'd usually give you a silver dollar for that. And then you wanted to make sure, you always made sure that you were gone from the courthouse by the potential time they could get back when they realized that was a problem. But I still have most of those silver dollars, actually, because I always saved them. And so hopefully there's not somebody out there today that I'm talking to that is one of those people I sent around on a wild goose chase finding Virginia City. Or they'll come in. I have a booklet of 8 pages of weird questions that people ask about Virginia City, about the Ponderosa, and asking us for. One of them is it's the Victorian era. They have these big tall the doors that are like 12-foot high doors, and they would ask why they're such tall doors. And I would always tell them, well, you've watched Bonanza, so you see that hat that Haas wears. It's got that real high crown on it. They dress like that. So we had to have these really tall doors to be able to have these guys be able to go in and out. And usually they just say, "Oh, okay." We have a big V on the side of the mountain for Virginia City, and that started in the 20s when the aircraft were delivering the mail and they used them for navigation. But people will ask, "What does that V stand for?" And there's usually two stories I'll usually tell them. One, it's not a V, it's an arrow that points to the gold. And or we'll tell them it's a V, it stands for Reno. And they usually just go, oh yeah, okay. So we have fun with it. I've got, like I say, 8 pages of these goofy questions and goofy answers that we give the tourists and so forth. But you know what? If it wasn't, I will truly say, if it wasn't for Bonanza coming on television and still being shown today, it's on our television locally. We see it. It's actually on 2 times at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It comes on one channel, and about 8 o'clock at night, I think it comes on another channel, like a Me TV or an older channel like that. So it is still out there advertising Virginia City every day in something like 19 or 20 countries. And this is why these people come here. They want to see where the Cartwrights were, where they went to town, what they did here. And sometimes I think that they are probably a little bit, I don't know, annoyed or surprised to find out that this is a mining community and not a town where they're going to walk down a dirt street and there's gunfights that occur and so forth. And so that sort of thing. But so that's kind of a real quick and dirty overview of how the Comstock changed and how Virginia City changed and how it changed. For the better in terms of tourism. And like I say, it'll always be a problem for me in terms of dealing with the fact of the myth versus the reality. But I would certainly be willing to entertain any particular questions that anybody has at this point.
All right. So Monette had a question. She said, how long did mining actually last there? In studying episodes, I've been surprised by how many episodes do use mining as a backdrop, for example, like The Crucible.
There is some reference to that. 1859 is when, June of 1859 is when gold was found in the immediate area here. And there was mining in one degree or another as it began to wane, all the way up through the 1940s. And then in reality, there is actually mining still going on around here today. There's one major company that is doing and actually beginning to start going back underground again. Because there is probably, it's been estimated that the amount of gold and silver that's in the ground is probably 75% of the value that is actually here.
Is that the one that you see on the train ride when you take the train ride from Carson City to Virginia City? Is that big mine?
Yes,
They said they used to mine it, then they
kind of.
stopped, and then with modern technology, they were able to realize that there was a ton more goods down there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the processing capabilities became much better. That mining aspect of Virginia City is a 4-hour presentation on a good day. On a bad day. On a good day, it's an 8-hour presentation. Because I can keep going as long as you want.
Well, I'm friends with Squeak Steele, who lives up the road from where you're sitting right now, obviously. And she's got that big pit that's off to the right of her.
Mhm.
Was that because they were mining it, or is that just the
that's
ground
the
has been eroding?
1920s when they started. In the 1920s, they started going into open pit mining. And that's called the Loring pit or the Arizona Comstock pit, depending upon which era and which mining company owned it at the time. But yeah, I think of it as the Arizona Comstock pit from the 20s. But yes, it was actively mined. There's 3 large pits like that between her. There's another one, a smaller one up north into town, and then there's the one back behind Squeak's place there on the divide. And then there's another one just down in Gold Hill, just after you go around Grinders Bend and around there. So there's a 3rd one there, and there's actually a 4th one, but you really can't see it. It's back off to the background someplace.
Monette wants to know if you showed the photo of you running the Mark Twain bookstore. Was that in your presentation? Did we miss it?
No, I didn't show that one. I didn't. I have a picture of me there, and I think it floats around in locations from time to time, but I didn't have it in this presentation. But we miss that from time. We kind of miss it, but we decided it was after 25 years doing that, having that on the side, because it was really my wife that really ran it for the most, and I was in there because I've always had a separate full-time job, and my phrase was there is that people would ask me if I owned the Mark Twain bookstore, and my phrase was always, "That's what my wife lets me believe."
Smart man. You probably had a very happy marriage.
That's right. We're heading for 57 this year.
See, that's all because of that. I know I always laugh about, you and I talked about this, but that piano, the piano with you put a quarter in it or 50 cents in it, and it played the piano and the drum and the the whole 9 yards. I was always disappointed when it wasn't working, because I'd always stop by there specifically to see it.
Yeah, those things were made in the 1890s up and into the 20s and 30s a little bit, and if you were that old, you probably wouldn't be working very well either.
Hey! Andy Clyde says the period referenced in the slide stops at the 1950s. Sure there aren't more? Did you stop at the 1950s?
There's around 2,500 more.
Yeah, Andy, you'll have to go to Virginia City and make a personal appointment with Joe. He'd be happy to spend an afternoon with you, I'm sure.
Absolutely. No, I just did it that way because I wanted to give you a feel of more of just basically kind of where it came from and how what it was like in 50s before it changed with the Bonanza in 1959, and then how we moved forward, and with the hotels and all the bed and breakfast and the tourism commission and national advertising and web pages and social media and all that sort of thing. From my standpoint, I'm the emergency management director for the county. So this whole COVID thing has kept me like super duper busy. I'm actually giving this presentation to you from my office up by the courthouse. And So I actually had somebody walk in and realize that I wasn't just sitting here
Talking to yourself.
commiserating. You know, I was doing something and they walked out, and I turned the phone off because it's a constant program. You know, so yeah.
Well, hopefully there won't be an earthquake or something, well, or a snow, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm fortunate that I started collecting these photographs back to the 1860s when I was about 10. I just always been fascinated with these photographs, and have collected. I have the large original document photographs that are all in safes, of course, and the safes are hidden in case you're thinking of where you know where I live. You know, so. But yeah, and I love to share those pictures with people. I love to share that information, and I do these talks at the Gold Hill Hotel and sometimes at Piper's Opera House, and they're usually to support or fund either the Historic District Foundation or the Piper's Opera House, you know, to help fund those things, you know. And I feel a responsibility to provide, to make other people try to remember all this knowledge and make sure that when I'm gone, that other people have some of that information in their head.
Well, I think you got a good chance since Bonanza has lasted 60 years. I can imagine that Virginia City's history will last a lot longer.
Oh, I think so. I think Virginia City will continue to thrive and move forward. The community in terms of residents is actually growing. I don't know how many new houses they built in town today. One of the things that's always kind of surprised me is, I don't know how this got started or occurs, but we seem to have a plethora of retired highway patrol and cops from various areas all around the nation that have tended to move in here. I'll bet you per capita, we probably have more retired policemen in Virginia City than any place. And I don't know if it started with me, because I retired from 30 years in law enforcement myself before I became well, that was at the same time I owned the bookstore, actually. And
A man that's worn many hats, it sounds like.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I did 6 years in the Army and in the law enforcement, and now emergency management and the bookstore. I've been very fortunate, and I'm very thankful for it.
Let's see. Manette says, can you talk a little about Lucius Beebe? Is it Beebe?
Yes,
Beebe?
Lucius Beebe and Charles Clay. Yeah, very much so. I remember them very clearly. My parents were very friendly with them, or very involved with them, because my stepfather published several of their books on railroads. I remember as a kid going to their house up on B Street, and they were, as I mentioned, kind of the bon vivants from the East Coast. They were high-class people from rich, very wealthy families, and I think they were searching for a feeling of the Wild West. They wanted to be like the John Mackeys and the Fairs and the Floods, you know, and kind of prance around town with their, they always wore older style Victorian clothing. I actually have one of the overcoats that from Charles Clay that he would wear around, the black wool overcoat, and which is about half again as tall as I am. And they had a dog that was named T-Bone Towser, and he was a Saint Bernard, and he would get out of the house and he would wander down to C Street, and he'd had all these various bars and so forth that sold hot dogs in their various locations, and he had a tour by himself that he would go from saloon to saloon, and they'd all give him a hot dog, you know. And many years later he died, and kind of the town joke was that he died because his cholesterol was so high from all of these hot dogs he ate, you know. But Beebe and Clegg were certainly a motivation, a movement in the community that helped bring Bonanza and set the stage for Bonanza to kind of take over, because when they owned the Territorial Enterprise newspaper, and they would advertise in the newspaper for all of these big restaurants and famous saloons and so forth back in the East Coast, in the mostly New England area, Massachusetts and those areas. And they would advertise for those businesses and actually have paid advertisements in the newspaper for them. Actually have, fortunate to have a copy of every newspaper that they published from 1952 to 1962, that 10-year period. And that one that I put up on the screen is just one page out of one of the bound volumes that I have, which is outstanding research capability. They put there's a section in there that Beebe and Clegg would go around to the saloons and they would see who was in the various local bars and who the locals were. And they kept their ear to the ground, and they'd publish, Frank Johnson went to San Francisco this weekend, and Louise Gallagher came back from the Bay Area yesterday and is back in town, and all that kind of local. And at that time, the community population was at the best maybe 500, and excuse me, 500 to 600. And they would, it was definitely a local newspaper. Beebe and Clegg were not really accepted by some of the people in the community because they were a gay couple, and they did not. So there were some people that did not like that sort of thing. There was actually some lawsuits that took place because of some people that were verbally abusing them, if you will, I guess. And so there was at least one lawsuit that I'm aware of and have some paperwork relating to that was settled amicably in the end, but did take place and so forth. But they were actually for the most part, they were pretty well accepted. And to this day, there's a small community of gay folks that live in the community that are very well accepted. And Virginia City has become a place that you can be who you are and be the way you want. If you want to dress up wildly or weirdly, nobody cares, And so it's a very forgiving, I guess you could say, community in many respects. But it is, I'll have to say, it is a highly conservative. I mean, even the people that you might think were liberal are very conservative. It's a very patriotic community. Flags are every place, it's a community of hunters and people who just think they're not. I wouldn't call anybody. There's nobody that I can think of in town that would be considered a radical right, if you would. But it is an ultra conservative community, or not. I wouldn't say ultra. It's just a very conservative community. Old Westerny attitudes, I guess, maybe.
Brenda Jackson wanted to know what's the population of Virginia City now? Do you have an idea?
Roughly about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100.
Oh, that's it.
But it varies a little bit, summer versus winter. Because you'll get summer people that will come in and that will work in businesses, and then they leave in the winter and so forth. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of apartment capability for people to live in small places. So a lot of the people that own businesses in town do not live in Virginia City. Their clerks may live in Reno or Carson or Dayton, or other sections, Mark Twain area of Story County. So there's not, there's a problem with available housing, like apartments and that sort of thing.
So what do they do with all that space that's like over your shoulder, all that space that's above the storefronts?
That's people called sky.
No. There's a second floor over your bookstore. So
that's not my bookstore, but
well, was your bookstore.
It looks
right?
like it. It's similar to that. That's actually the Silver Queen Saloon over my.
I'm looking the wrong direction.
Right
Okay, sorry, I'm looking the wrong
over
direction.
my right shoulder is right there on my left. Right here. That's Grandma's Fudge, and upstairs is the Oddfellows Hall, and then the other building back over there is the Silver Queen Saloon, and that's all hotel up above. To over here, oh, wait a minute, over here, someplace, but to my right shoulder, this is weird. To my right shoulder is a new little place that just recently opened. It's a little restaurant called, has nothing to do with me, but it's called Joe's All American Food. And it's just a little restaurant, and they actually serve pretty good food there. And then back behind me is the Bonanza Casino and Saloon, which they're trying to get open. That sold several years back. The owner was Angelo Petrini, and he sold the business because his daughters didn't want to take it over. That in the Delta, he owned that in the Delta, and sold both businesses to the same guy, who was a retired dentist.
The Bonanza one has a nice little display in there, though, right? Has some pictures and the little. Is
Yeah,
that the
they do.
one?
Yeah, they do have a bunch of stuff like that in there. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Andy Clyde wants to know, can you recall Virginia City Days in 1962, I believe, and the Nevada Centennial in 1964? I believe some of the Bonanza gang visited the city on those occasions.
I'm not sure if that question is intended to get me to reveal my age, or if
I think it's to reveal, did the Bonanza guys actually come to Virginia City for it? And did you get to meet
Yes,
them? And what are your tales about them?
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember them. I was back and forth in town in that period of time because I was, 62. And 63, then I was in college in California, so I was back and forth in town. But yeah, I very definitely remember Bonanza days. I remember when these guys came to town. It was a big deal. What I do remember about it, though, if I'm not mistaken, the one guy that would not come to town was Adam.
Purnell?
What was his name?
Purnell Roberts?
Yeah, Purnell Roberts. For some reason, he was having some big tiff with these other guys or something at that time, as I recall, if I remember correctly. And he didn't come to town, but Haas and Little Joe and Ben, they were all there with other members, a couple other members of the cast too, if I remember correctly. That Bonanza days didn't last very long. It seems to me it only lasted maybe 4 or 5 years, and it kind of died out for whatever the reasons. I wasn't here at the time when it died out. At that time, I would have been in the Army, and I was over in an Asian country, compliments of my uncle. So it didn't last out very long, but it was pretty wild. There was some pretty wild celebrations with the parades with those guys coming to town and so forth. Virginia City is not. It's not unusual for you to see well-known celebrity type of people in town from a couple of different standpoints. One, when they used to appear regularly in the casinos in Reno on the dark days, Mondays and Tuesdays, you'd see them wandering around town, any number of celebrity type of people. Same thing with people that appeared in Lake Tahoe, Harvey's Casino, and so forth. You'd see them around, so it's not unusual. So, but to see them walking up and down the street. But when the Cartwrights came to town on those Bonanza Day things, that was big business. That was big time. That was wild times, and a lot of drinking that went on, a lot of carousing, a lot of wild times, as I recall.
Well, they had to keep up their reputation of the show about why everybody went to Virginia City.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they did. You bet.
So Andy says Lauren Green, Dan Blocker, and Mike Landon all received Silver Spur Awards in the early 60s and visited Virginia City to accept the awards. Do you recall that?
Vaguely, I do remember receiving these the awards. There was also some awards that were given out by the community to the people too, and I don't remember what they were called particularly. I know Don McBride provided an award to the show and to the people Don McBride being the guy owning the Bucket of Blood Saloon. I remember that and I think my parents had something to do with it as well, that they issued these awards and recognitions for being so responsible for marketing and reviving Virginia City.
Yeah, we actually saw earlier today where David had a plaque that was presented to him by Don McBride about it. And it said something about asking for a free drink if you said Bonanza sent you. And he kind of laughed in 99 and said, you can try it, but I don't even know if the guy still owned the saloon, but whoever the guy was that owned the saloon probably got sick of us convention attendees all saying, hey, David Dortort said we should ask for a free drink.
Yeah, that's right.
He's probably like, no.
Well, the Bucket of Blood's been owned by the same family since 1931.
Oh, wow.
And so it's gone from grandfather to father to son now. So to grandson, if you will. Marshall McBride owns and operates the saloon now. And I've known Marshall since his high school days, because Marshall, I think, is about 10 years younger than me. And so I see and go back and forth. There's, it's a kind of a sad thing, but if you look around the community, old timers in the community, I remember years ago, I used to think, and I used to talk to the old timers in the community. And now people remind me, and I say things like that, people go, hey, I hate to have to tell you this, but now you are one of the old timers in the community.
You've graduated. What do you think of that?
Yeah, right. And so there's you can almost count probably on two hands of the old timers that know that period of time and that history. There's one, two, three, four, five. Oh, shoot. I'm thinking at the most 8 or 9 people in the community that would have any kind of recollection of that period of time.
Wow. Let's see. As a side note to the one before about the Silver Spur, it does say Pernell Roberts apparently did get the Silver Spur, but he was known to visit the area on his own and with his son Christopher several times. Any anecdotes? Do you ever recall seeing Pernell Roberts walking around Virginia City?
No.
Did you know him if you saw him?
I sure don't, and that's actually new information to me. So that's one of the beauties of doing something like this. We both sides of the presentation learn stuff, and so that's something that I was unaware of. I didn't know that he would come up here by himself with a son, and that's a piece of information that I can store in my Bonanza knowledge box.
There you go. Well, Andy's got a lot of them, so he's a good one to gravitate to.
The Bonanza, whole Bonanza thing is not something that I've really studied in depth. I kind of lived through it, I guess you could say, but I never really studied it in depth from a more current history kind of thing. But it certainly is an important historical factor and fact relating to Virginia City.
But did you always find that laughable that they would just hop on their horse and go visit the dock and be back by nightfall and back and forth like a couple trips a day? And you were like, right. That couldn't happen. That's not true.
Yeah, they'll be in town and something will come up and they say, well, we better get back to the ranch. And immediately they're, of course, back to the ranch. And I guess that is what they call artistic license.
Yes.
And so forth. And that's okay. But we have people that will come to town and say, well, how far is it to the ranch? And we say, well, I don't know. I think it's around 600 miles or so. You go, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, the ranch house is in a soundstage in Los Angeles someplace. and so it's quite a ways there to get to that house. And then after it moved up to Lake Tahoe, there was a thing too, there was 2 of us, Angelo Petrini and I and a couple of others had talked, this is several years back now, talked and tried to develop an attitude or a process, if you would, I guess, to see if we could actually buy the house from the ranch people.
Yeah. And
move it to Virginia City. And we had raised some money to try to do that. But their attorney would not even hear of it, wouldn't listen to it at all. And, you know, after Chris Anderson sold it and so forth, they didn't want to do anything. I guess they like to do it, and I guess they still hold like private parties there and so forth, from what I understand.
What, up at the ranch house?
Yeah, up in
Incline Village? What?
Up in Incline.
No, it's not there anymore, right?
That's what I understand.
Yeah, no, it's gone. It's gone. The building's been taken away, gone. It's not there anymore. They're supposed to be rebuilding it in Elko.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, which
somebody must have bought it.
How far away is Elko from you?
About 4.5 hours.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, that's sad, because it would have been neat if they'd have talked to us and let us purchase it from them and move it to Virginia City. I think that would have been really cool.
Well, we have, it's about 5 till 2, so I guess we need to wrap this up. But Joe, wow, thank you so much for your time and for your information about Virginia City. If anybody wants to get in touch with you or wants to chat further about Virginia City history, since you have obviously many decades worth of knowledge and much you didn't share with us, is there an easy way to do you have a website, or do you have a?
No, I just have an email. My email, you're certainly welcome to email me on, is on the side, ONTHESIDE 2001 @gmail.com.
Okay.
On the side 2001 @gmail.com. I have a couple of emails, but that's the one I would prefer to use for this purpose.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we'll get that posted. So if anybody wants to follow up with you about any historical knowledge, I know Manette's already been in touch with you. We'll hear her side of what she's been chatting with you about on Sunday. So that'll be good. But yeah, well, stay safe and get back to making sure the town stays safe. And we hope to see you around. And again, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it.
Good.
You guys have a great day too.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Take care.